I'm Major Evelyn Cole, 33, an Air Force Special Operations pilot who's spent half her life flying missions no one talks about. For years, I looked up to my Uncle Ray, the man who taught me to shoot, saluted me at commissioning, and made me believe we wore the same uniform for the same reasons. But at a family barbecue, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're the reason women shouldn't be in combat." That moment changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed or humiliated by someone you once admired? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. And before I get into what happened next, let me know where you're tuning in from. If you've ever had to stand your ground when someone tried to cut you down, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about earning respect and reclaiming your worth. What happened after that barbecue might surprise you. I stood at the grill that afternoon, a glass of lemonade sweating in my hand, still wearing my flight suit jacket from the morning brief. The sun was high and clean over the backyard, and the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid hung in the air like a promise. Uncle Ray had invited me to his annual 4th of July barbecue, the kind of gathering where folding tables sagged under potato salad and store-bought pies, and everyone knew everyone's service record before they knew their first name. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years, not since my promotion to major came through and the Air Force reassigned me to a squadron I couldn't name in conversations like these. He was holding court near the cooler, his Army retired ball cap pushed back on his head, telling some story about a patrol in Mosul that I'd heard 3 times before. The details changed depending on who was listening. His friend Mike Harrison stood beside him, quieter, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of granite and left to weather. Former Navy SEAL Senior Chief, late 40s, with the kind of stillness that made you forget he was in the room until he spoke. I'd met him once before, years ago, when I was still a second lieutenant trying to figure out how to salute without looking like a recruit. Ray saw me first. He raised his beer in a mock toast and called out across the lawn. "Look who finally showed up. Evie, sweetheart, you get lost on the way from the air-conditioned office." I smiled, small and tight, and walked over. "Just finished a duty rotation, Uncle Ray." "Came straight from the flight line." "Flight line," he repeated, drawing it out like he was tasting something sour. "That's what they call sitting in a cockpit playing video games now?" A few people laughed. Not the kind of laughter that included me. Mike glanced at Ray, then at me, but said nothing. I took a sip of lemonade and let the moment pass. It wasn't the first time Ray had made a comment like that, and it probably wouldn't be the last. He'd been making them since I commissioned, little jabs wrapped in humor that stung more than they should have. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself he was just being Ray. But something about the way he looked at me that day felt different. Sharper. Like he'd been waiting for an audience. I set my drink down on the table and reached for a burger bun, trying to move past it. Ray took a step closer, his voice dropping into that rehearsed cadence he used when he wanted to sound authoritative. "You know, Evie, when I was in, we didn't have all these programs and quotas. You earned your spot or you went home. Simple as that." I looked up at him. "I earned mine, Uncle Ray." "Sure you did," he said, nodding slowly like he was agreeing with a child. "I'm just saying, things are different now. Easier." Mike shifted his weight, still watching, his expression unreadable. I could feel the eyes on me now, the attention gathering like static before a storm. I wanted to leave. I wanted to say something that would shut him down without making a scene. But I stayed quiet because that's what I'd learned to do. You don't engage. You don't escalate. You let it roll off and you move forward. Ray wasn't done. He took another drink, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and smiled. "I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm proud of you, kiddo. But let's be honest. Flying a desk and filing reports isn't exactly the same as being boots on the ground." I felt my jaw tighten. "I don't fly a desk." Right. "You fly planes." "I get it." He gestured vaguely toward the sky. "But it's not the same as being in the dirt, you know? Real combat. The kind where you don't get to tap out and go home when things get hard." The yard had gone quieter now. Conversations were trailing off, people turning to watch. Ray seemed to notice, seemed to feed on it. He straightened up, his voice louder, more confident. "Hell, half the time I wonder if they even should have let women into combat roles. No offense, Evie, but there's a reason things were the way they were. I felt the heat rise in my chest, felt the familiar weight of humiliation settling over me like a second skin. I set the bun down carefully, my hands steady even though my pulse was hammering in my ears. I didn't trust myself to speak. Not yet. Not here. Mike Harrison set his beer down on the table. The sound was quiet, deliberate. He looked at Ray for a long moment, then turned to me. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "What unit did you serve with, Major?" I hesitated. The question wasn't casual. The way he asked it, the way he was looking at me, told me he already suspected something. I thought about deflecting, about giving him the name of my current squadron, the one I could talk about at cookouts and family dinners. But something in his eyes made me stop. Something that said he'd know if I lied. "Unit 47, I said. The silence that followed wasn't like the one before. This one was different. Heavier. Mike's face changed, just slightly, the color draining from his cheeks. His hand, still holding the beer, went slack. The bottle slipped, fell, shattered against the wooden deck in a spray of foam and glass. No one moved to clean it up. "The ghost unit," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I thought none survived. Ray looked between us, confused, his smile fading. The yard was silent now. Every face turned toward me. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. I just met Mike's gaze and held it, waiting for the weight of recognition to settle over the rest of them. "I did," I said. Mike took a step back, his hand coming up to his mouth. He shook his head slowly, like he was trying to reconcile something that didn't fit. "Jesus Christ," he said quietly. "Jesus Christ, Ray, do you have any idea?" Ray cut him off, his voice tight. "Idea about what? What the hell is Unit 47? Mike didn't answer him. He just kept looking at me, his eyes wide, haunted. I could see the questions forming, the memories of stories he'd heard in briefings and bars, whispers about missions that didn't exist and operators who never came home. I saw the moment he put it together. The moment he realized what I was. I picked up my lemonade, finished it in one long swallow, and set the glass down on the table. "I should go," I said. My voice was calm. Professional. Like I was excusing myself from a meeting, not walking away from the wreckage of a family gathering. "Thanks for the invite, Uncle Ray." I turned and walked toward the gate, my boots crunching over gravel and dry grass. Behind me, I heard Mike's voice, low and urgent. "Ray, you have no idea what you just did." I didn't look back. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove home in silence. My hands didn't shake until I was inside my apartment with the door locked behind me. Then I sat on the edge of my couch, still in my flight suit, and stared at the framed photo on the wall. 12 faces. 11 of them gone. One of them still here, still breathing, still carrying the weight of what we'd done and what we'd lost. I thought about Uncle Ray's face when Mike dropped the glass. I thought about the way the laughter died. And I thought about how none of it mattered anymore, because the only people who really understood were already dead. I grew up wanting to be like Uncle Ray. That's the part that makes everything harder to carry. When I was 7, he took me to the range for the first time, put a .22 rifle in my hands, and taught me to breathe between heartbeats. When I was 13 and my father died, he was the one who drove 4 hours to sit with me in silence because he knew I didn't want to talk. When I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Force at 22, he gave me my first salute. His hand was steady, his smile wide, his pride unmistakable. I thought we'd always have that. The distance started slow. At first, it was just missed calls, postponed visits, excuses that sounded reasonable. He was busy. I was busy. Life happened. But I noticed the shift after I made captain at 26. He stopped asking about my career. Stopped offering advice. When I mentioned my assignments, he'd nod and change the subject. When I told him I'd been selected for a special operations detachment, his response was a vague, "That's great, kiddo," before he launched into a story about his own time in service, back when things were different, back when standards were higher. I didn't understand it then. I thought maybe he was just getting older, drifting into the nostalgia that all veterans seem to carry like a second uniform. But Mike Harrison told me the truth years later, after everything fell apart. Ray had stalled at Staff Sergeant, E6, after 16 years in the Army. He'd tested for Sergeant First Class twice and failed both times. His career plateaued, and instead of accepting it, he'd built a mythology around himself, a story where he was the standard bearer for how things used to be, before the military got soft, before quotas and political correctness diluted what it meant to serve. Every time I advanced, it became harder for him to stomach. Not because he didn't love me. I think he did, in his own way. But because my success made his stagnation unbearable. I was a reminder of everything he couldn't achieve, and worse, I was a woman. In his mind, that meant I'd been handed something he'd bled for and never received. By the time I was promoted to major at 33, we barely spoke. He didn't call to congratulate me. Didn't send a card. I heard through my mother that he'd made some comment at a family dinner, something about how they were handing out ranks like participation trophies now. I let it go. I had to. Because holding on to anger wouldn't change anything, and I had bigger things to focus on. Unit 47 wasn't something you applied for. It wasn't a unit you requested or even knew existed until the day you were read into it. I got the call on a Tuesday in March, 0900 hours, from a colonel I'd never met. He told me to report to a building I didn't know existed on a base I'd been stationed at for 2 years. No explanation. No briefing. Just an address and a time. The detachment was small. 12 operators, a mix of Air Force pilots, combat controllers, and a handful of Army and Navy personnel on loan for specializations we didn't have in-house. We didn't have a motto. We didn't have a patch. Our designation was a number and nothing else. Our missions were pulled from the bottom drawer of JSC tasking, the ones that couldn't be tied to any official unit, the ones where success meant silence and failure meant deniability. They told us on the first day, no one outside this room will ever know what you do. Your families won't know. Your friends won't know. If you die, your name goes on a wall in a building no one visits. If you succeed, the mission never happened. If you fail, you were never here. We signed papers that made us ghosts. We trained like we were already dead. I flew insertion missions. Low-altitude, night ops, terrain masking that put you so close to the ground you could count the rocks in the dark. I dropped teams into places that didn't exist on any map and pulled them out when the radios went silent. I learned to fly by instruments and instinct because GPS signals didn't reach where we went, and if you hesitated, you died. Not just you. Everyone depending on you. We were in 18 missions in 2 years. I can't tell you where. I can't tell you when. I can tell you that we lost people. Not all at once. 1 here, 2 there. A combat controller on an objective gone wrong. A pilot who took ground fire and didn't make it back. Each loss carved something out of the rest of us, something we couldn't name and couldn't replace. The last mission was supposed to be routine. That's what they told us in the brief. High-value target extraction, Northern Kandahar Province, 0300 hours local time. 12 of us went in. I was flying the lead bird, a modified Black Hawk with avionics that didn't officially exist. My co-pilot was a captain named Torres, a man who'd flown more combat hours than anyone I'd ever met. In the back, we had 6 operators, 4 Air Force, 2 Army. The second bird had the rest of the team. The insertion went clean. We dropped them at the coordinates, pulled up, and circled at altitude while they moved to the objective. Radio chatter was minimal. Controlled. Professional. Everything we'd trained for. Then the first explosion hit. I don't know what it was. An IED, maybe? RPG. Something that shouldn't have been there, something Intel missed or didn't care about. The radio erupted. Voices shouting over each other, automatic weapons fire in the background, someone screaming for air support. I pushed the stick forward, brought us down fast, Torres calling out altitude and obstacles while I focused on the infrared feed. I could see muzzle flashes. I could see bodies on the ground, but I couldn't tell which ones were ours. The second bird took a hit before it could land. I watched it spiral, watched the tail rotor disintegrate, watched it slam into the hillside and explode. No one got out. 6 people gone in 3 seconds. Torres was yelling at me to pull up, to get clear, but I couldn't. I had 4 operators on the ground and no other way to get them out. I brought the bird in under fire. Rounds punched through the fuselage, spiderwebbed the windscreen, tore through hydraulics and control systems. The operators ran for the ramp, dragging one wounded, and I held the bird steady while Torres returned fire from the co-pilot seat. We lifted off with 2 engines screaming and warning lights across the entire panel. I flew us out on instinct and adrenaline, 30 miles to the nearest base, Torres talking me through every shudder and lurch. We landed hard. The bird didn't fly again. 4 operators survived. 8 didn't. I was the pilot who brought them home. I was also the pilot who couldn't save the rest. They gave me a medal I can't wear and a citation I can't read to anyone outside a SCAF. They promoted me and transferred me out of Unit 47 because there was no Unit 47 anymore. Not after that. They disbanded us, scrubbed the records, and reassigned everyone who survived to places where we'd never talk about what we'd done. Uncle Ray never knew. He never asked. He never saw the scars or heard the nightmares or understood why I stopped coming to family dinners. He just saw a woman in a uniform, rising through ranks he thought she didn't deserve, carrying a legacy he couldn't comprehend. And when Mike Harrison asked what unit I'd served with, and I told him, I saw Ray's face change. I saw the realization land. Not understanding. Just the recognition that he'd been wrong. That he'd humiliated someone who'd earned every inch of ground she'd ever stood on. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. I didn't go back to work the next day. I called in and used a personal day, something I almost never did, and spent the morning sitting on my couch in running shorts and an old t-shirt, staring at nothing. My apartment was quiet in the way that amplifies everything else. The hum of the refrigerator. The distant sound of traffic. My own breathing. I kept replaying the moment at the barbecue, the sound of Mike's glass hitting the deck, the way Uncle Ray's face had drained of color when he realized he'd miscalculated. I wanted to feel something clean. Anger, maybe. Satisfaction. But all I felt was hollow. My phone buzzed around 1100 hours. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, I picked it up and saw 3 missed calls from my mother and 2 texts from a number I didn't recognize. The texts were from Mike Harrison. The first one said, "I'm sorry about yesterday. Can we talk?" The second one, sent an hour later, said, "I think you should know what Ray's saying. Call me when you can." I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen. Made coffee I didn't drink. Stood at the window and watched the parking lot below, people coming and going, living lives that didn't include classified missions or family members who resented you for succeeding. I thought about calling Mike back. I thought about blocking his number. In the end, I did neither. I just stood there until the sun moved across the floor and the coffee went cold. The knock on my door came just after 1300 hours. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered not answering. But then I heard Mike's voice, low and steady. "Major Cole, it's Mike Harrison. I just want to talk. 5 minutes." I opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still wearing the same jeans and polo shirt from yesterday, looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw tight. He didn't wait for an invitation. "I need to apologize." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. I didn't stop him. I should have stopped him. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "It's not your job to manage my uncle." "No," Mike said. "But it's my job to recognize when someone's been where I've been. And I should have seen it sooner. The way you carry yourself. The way you didn't react when he was pushing you. That's not something you learn in RODC. That's something you learn in the field." I didn't respond. He shifted his weight, glanced down the hallway, then back at me. I deployed to Kandahar in 2008. We ran joint ops with a unit that didn't have a name, just a number. Unit 47. I never met them face to face, but I heard stories. About a mission that went bad. 12 went in. 1 came out. I felt my throat tighten. "I can't talk about it." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to. He stopped, rubbed a hand over his face. "I need you to understand. Ray doesn't know what he's talking about. He never did. But yesterday, when you said Unit 47, I knew. And I tried to tell him, after you left. I tried to explain that you're not what he thinks you are. That you've done things he can't even imagine." "What did he say?" Mike hesitated. "He didn't believe me. He thinks I'm exaggerating. He thinks it's some kind of admin unit with a dramatic name. I almost laughed. Almost. Of course he does. I can talk to him again, Mike offered. Don't, I said, cutting him off. It won't change anything. He's made up his mind about who I am. About what women in the military are. And nothing you say is going to shift that. Mike looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're probably right. But for what it's worth, I told him he owes you an apology. A real one. I won't hold my breath. He smiled, small and sad. Yeah, me neither. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote down my number. If you ever need anything, doesn't matter what, you call me. I took the paper, unfolded it, read the number written in block letters. Thanks. I mean it, he said. Anything. After he left, I closed the door and stood there holding the paper, feeling the weight of a kindness I didn't know how to accept. I hadn't asked for Mike's understanding, hadn't asked for his apology or his offer of help. But I couldn't deny it felt like something. Not closure. Not vindication. Just acknowledgement. From someone who understood what it meant to come back when others didn't. I folded the paper and set it on the kitchen counter. Then I went back to the couch and sat in the quiet, letting the day pass without trying to fill it. 3 days later, Uncle Ray's truck broke down on base. He called me at 16:30 hours, his voice strained, trying to sound casual. Hey, Evie. I know things were weird the other day, but I'm in a bind. Truck won't start, and I'm stuck outside the commissary. You think you could swing by and give me a jump? I was at my desk, finishing paperwork. I stared at the phone, weighing my response. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to drive over and help him, because that's what family did. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when the wound was still fresh. Uncle Ray, I said carefully. I'm in the middle of something. But I can call the motor pool for you. They'll send someone out. Silence on the other end. Then, you're serious. I'm serious. Evie, come on. It's a jump start. It'll take 5 minutes. And I'm telling you I can't. I'll call the motor pool. They'll take care of it. Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge. Fine. Do what you gotta do. He hung up. I sat there holding the phone, feeling the finality of it settle over me like dust. Then I called the motor pool, gave them Ray's location, and went back to my paperwork. I didn't hear from him again for weeks. My mother called once, asking if we'd had a fight, and I told her it was complicated. She didn't push. She knew better. Instead, she said Ray had been quieter than usual, spending more time at the VA, talking to Mike Harrison. I didn't ask what they talked about. I didn't want to know. Mike reached out again a month later. Not a phone call. A text. Ray's been asking about you. I think he's starting to understand. Not sure if that matters to you. Just wanted you to know. I read the message 3 times before responding. Thanks for telling me. That was all. I didn't ask for details. Didn't ask what Ray had said or whether he'd actually apologized. Because the truth was, I didn't need his apology anymore. I didn't need his understanding or his approval. I'd spent years trying to earn both, trying to prove I belonged, trying to make him see me as something other than a quota or a mistake. And it had cost me more than I wanted to admit. I'd stopped waiting for him to recognize my worth. I'd stopped waiting for anyone to. That night, I pulled the photo of Unit 47 off the wall and set it on the coffee table. 12 faces. 11 gone. I traced my finger over each one, said their names quietly, like a prayer. They were the only ones who ever really saw me. The only ones who knew what I'd survived and what I'd lost in the process. I didn't need Uncle Ray to understand. I just needed to keep moving forward. The promotion to Lieutenant Colonel came through in November. I was sitting in Colonel Rourke's office at 0800 hours when he told me, his voice matter of fact, like he was reading a weather report. Congratulations, Major Cole. The board selected you below the zone. Promotion is effective 1st of December. You've earned it. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out into the hallway feeling nothing. Below the zone meant early promotion, ahead of my peers, a recognition of exceptional performance. It should have felt like an achievement. Instead, It felt like another line on a record that no one outside a classified vault would ever read. The citation was sealed. The missions were sealed. The people who died so I could earn that promotion were sealed in graves and redacted files. I drove home and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, engine off, hands on the steering wheel. I thought about calling my mother. Thought about calling Mike Harrison. In the end, I called no one. I went upstairs, changed into workout clothes, and ran 8 miles until my legs burned and my mind went quiet. The ceremony was small. Just Colonel Rourke, a handful of officers from the squadron, and a photographer who documented it for my service record. My mother flew in, stood in the front row, and cried when Rourke pinned the silver oak leaves on my collar. Uncle Ray didn't come. I hadn't invited him. I hadn't spoken to him since the day his truck broke down, and I sent the motor pool instead of showing up myself. After the ceremony, my mother hugged me and whispered, "Your father would be so proud." I nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and thanked her for coming. She asked if I wanted to get lunch, and I told her I had meetings. I didn't. I just wanted to be alone. But Colonel Rourke pulled me aside before I could leave. "Lieutenant Colonel Cole, I've got an assignment for you. Nothing official yet, but I want you to start thinking about it." "Yes, sir." He glanced around, lowered his voice. "We've got a young pilot in the squadron. First Lieutenant Sarah Gwynn. Sharp, capable, but she's getting pushback from some of the older NCOs. Nothing overt. Just the usual skepticism about whether she can handle the pressure. I want you to mentor her." I understood immediately. It wasn't about her skills. It was about perception. About proving she belonged in a space where some people still believed women didn't. "I can do that, sir." "I know you can," Rourke said. "You've been doing it your whole career, whether you realized it or not." I met Lieutenant Nguyen the following Monday. She was 25, Vietnamese American, and carried herself with the kind of cautious confidence that came from always having to prove yourself twice as hard. We sat in the briefing room after hours, just the two of us, and I asked her what she needed. She hesitated, then said, "Honestly, ma'am, I just need to know it gets easier." "It doesn't," I said. "But you get stronger." She looked at me, surprised by the honesty. I didn't sugarcoat it. Didn't tell her that respect would come if she worked hard enough or kept her head down. I told her the truth. Some people would never see her as an equal, no matter what she did. But that didn't mean she should stop. It meant she should do the work for herself, not for them. We met every week after that. I reviewed her flight logs, gave her feedback on her approach patterns, talked through scenarios she'd encounter in the field. But mostly, I just listened. Let her vent about the comments, the assumptions, the subtle ways people tried to diminish her. I didn't offer platitudes. I just told her she wasn't alone. One afternoon in December, she asked me about my service record. "I saw you have a classified citation, ma'am. Can I ask what it was for?" "No," I said simply. "But I can tell you it cost more than it was worth." She didn't push. Just nodded, like she understood. That same month, Mike Harrison called me. It was late, after 2,200 hours, and I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. "Major, sorry, Lieutenant Colonel Cole." "It's Mike." "I know," I said. "What's up?" "It's Ray." His voice was tight. "He's in the hospital. Heart attack. They think he'll be okay, but it was close." I sat up, the exhaustion I'd been feeling evaporating in an instant. "Which hospital?" "VA Medical Center, room 314. He's stable now," but Mike paused. "He's been asking for you." I didn't respond right away. I thought about the barbecue, the way Ray had humiliated me in front of everyone. The way he dismissed my service, my sacrifice, everything I'd done. I thought about the weeks of silence, the unanswered calls, the chasm that had opened between us. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Evie," Mike started, then stopped. "I know you don't owe him anything. But I think he's starting to understand. What you've been through. What you've done. It's eating him up." "Good," I said, and I meant it. Not out of cruelty. Out of honesty. Because understanding should hurt when it comes too late. Mike sighed. "Fair enough. I just thought you should know." I hung up and sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Part of me wanted to drive to the hospital right then. Part of me wanted to delete Mike's number and never think about Uncle Ray again. In the end, I did neither. I just lay there, letting the weight of the decision press down on me, knowing that whatever I chose, it wouldn't change what had already been broken. 2 days later, I went to the hospital. Not because I'd forgiven him. Not because I thought it would fix anything. But because I needed to see him. Needed to know if the man who'd taught me to shoot, who'd given me my first salute, was still in there somewhere beneath the bitterness and resentment. Room 314 was at the end of a long hallway, sterile and quiet except for the sound of monitors beeping. I stood outside the door for a full minute, hand on the frame, trying to decide if I was ready. Then I pushed it open and stepped inside. Uncle Ray was lying in the bed, looking older and smaller than I remembered. His skin was gray, his hair thinner. And 4 ran into his arm, and a monitor tracked his heartbeat in steady green lines. He turned his head when he heard me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. "Evie," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came." "Yeah," I said. "I came." He closed his eyes, took a breath. "I'm sorry." For what I said. For he stopped, swallowed hard. "Mike told me what Unit 47 was. What you did." "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," I said quietly. He flinched. "No, I didn't. I just assumed," he shook his head. "I thought you had it easy. That they were handing you things I had to fight for. And I resented you for it. That's on me." I pulled up a chair and sat down. "You stalled at E6. I get it. That's hard. But I didn't take anything from you, Uncle Ray. I earned my rank the same way you earned yours. The only difference is I kept going." "I know," he said, and his voice cracked. "I know that now. But I couldn't see it then. All I saw was," he stopped, looked away. "All I saw was someone passing me by. And instead of being proud, I got bitter. I didn't say anything. Just sat there, letting him carry the weight of his own words. "Mike told me about Kandahar," Ray continued. "About the mission. He didn't know details, but he knew enough. 12 went in, 1 came out. That was you." "That was me," I said. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Respect. And regret. "I don't know how you live with that." "One day at a time," I said. "Same as everyone else." We sat in silence for a while, the monitors beeping steadily in the background. Finally, Ray spoke again. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I was wrong. About everything." I stood up, straightened my uniform. "I appreciate that, Uncle Ray. I do. But forgiveness isn't something I'm ready to give yet." He nodded, his eyes wet. "I understand." I walked to the door, paused, then looked back. "Get better. And maybe, when you're out of here, we can try again. No guarantees. But maybe." "I'd like that," he said. I left the hospital and drove home in silence, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not closure. Not resolution. But the possibility of something like it. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Uncle Ray recovered slowly, spending weeks in physical therapy and cardiac rehab, while Mike Harrison kept me updated through occasional texts. I didn't visit again, didn't call. I needed distance, needed time to sort through everything that had surfaced at that barbecue and in the hospital room afterward. Some wounds don't heal just because someone apologizes. Some require space and silence before you can even begin to assess the damage. I threw myself into work. The mentorship with Lieutenant Nguyen became something I looked forward to, a reminder that my experience, however painful, could serve a purpose beyond my own survival. She was progressing well, gaining confidence in her flight operations, and the skepticism from the senior NCOs had started to fade. Not because they'd changed their minds about women in combat roles, but because she'd proven herself in ways they couldn't dismiss. One afternoon in March, after a particularly difficult training exercise, she sat across from me in the debriefing room, exhausted and frustrated. "I don't know how you do it, ma'am." The constant second-guessing. The feeling that every mistake gets magnified because of who you are. "You stop caring about their perception," I said. "You focus on the work. The mission. The people depending on you. Everything else is noise." "But doesn't it get to you?" she asked. "Even a little?" I thought about Uncle Ray. About the years of small comments and dismissive jokes. About standing at that barbecue while he declared I was the reason women shouldn't be in combat. Yeah, I said. It gets to me. But I don't let it stop me. That's the difference. She nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then she asked, do you think it'll ever change? The attitudes, I mean. Maybe, I said. But not in our lifetime. We're just here to make it easier for the ones who come after us. She smiled at that, small but genuine. That's a pretty heavy burden, ma'am. Most things worth carrying are. In April, Colonel Rourke called me into his office again. This time, it wasn't about a promotion or an assignment. He closed the door, gestured for me to sit, and pulled a file from his desk drawer. I wanted you to see this before it goes into the archive. I opened it. Inside were declassified portions of the Unit 47 operation report, the mission in Kandahar that had ended the unit. Most of it was still redacted, black bars covering names and locations and operational details. But there, on the third page, was a commendation. For exceptional bravery under fire. For piloting a critically damaged aircraft through hostile territory and extracting 4 personnel under direct enemy engagement. For actions above and beyond the call of duty. My name was on it. And beneath it, a note, recommended for Silver Star. Downgraded to classified citation due to operational security concerns. I stared at the page, feeling something cold settle in my chest. They downgraded it. They had to, Rourke said quietly. The mission didn't exist. The unit didn't exist. A Silver Star would have raised questions they couldn't answer. So instead, I get a piece of paper no one will ever see. You get the knowledge that you earned it, Rourke said. And the knowledge that the people who matter know what you did. I closed the file and handed it back to him. Does that include Uncle Ray? Rourke hesitated. I don't know. Does it matter? I thought about that. Thought about Ray lying in the hospital bed, apologizing for assumptions he'd made out of ignorance and bitterness. Thought about Mike Harrison's face when I told him what unit I'd served with. Thought about Lieutenant Nguyen fighting the same battles I'd fought, earning respect inch by inch in a system designed to doubt her. No, I said finally. It doesn't matter. Not anymore. Rourke nodded, like he'd expected that answer. For what it's worth, Lieutenant Colonel, you've done more for this Air Force than most people will ever know. And that has to be enough. It is, I said. And I meant it. That evening, I got a call from Mike Harrison. His voice was careful, measured. Evie, I wanted to let you know. Ray's been asking if he can see you again. Not to apologize again. Just to talk. He's been going to the VA a lot, talking to other veterans about the things he missed. The things he didn't understand. I think he's trying to become someone better. That's good, I said. I hope he does. But you're not ready, Mike said. It wasn't a question. No, I admitted. I'm not. Maybe someday. But not yet. I understand. I'll tell him. Mike paused. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this exactly right. You don't owe him anything. And the fact that you went to see him in the hospital at all says more about your character than his. Thanks, Mike. Anytime. And Evie, he stopped, seemed to choose his words carefully. If you ever want to talk about Kandahar, about Unit 47, I'm here. I won't ask questions you can't answer. But I've been where you are. Not the same place, but close enough. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who's seen the dark. I felt my throat tighten. I'll keep that in mind. After I hung up, I sat on my couch and looked at the photo of Unit 47 on the coffee table where I'd left it months ago. 12 faces. 11 gone. I picked it up, studied each one, remembered their names and their voices and the way they'd laughed in the ready room before missions. They were gone. I was here. And, somehow, I had to make that mean something. I thought about Lieutenant Nguyen, about the next generation coming up behind me, about all the battles they'd have to fight just to earn the right to do the job they'd already proven they could do. I thought about the classified citation locked in a vault somewhere, a medal I'd never wear, recognition I'd never receive publicly. I thought about Uncle Ray, trying to reconcile the person he'd believed I was with the person I'd always been. And I realized something. I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't need anyone's validation. The people who mattered, the ones who'd fought beside me, the ones who died beside me, they'd known. That was enough. It had to be. I stood up, walked to the wall, and hung the photo back where it belonged. Not hidden away, not forgotten, just present. A reminder of who I'd been and what I'd survived and the people I carried with me every day. The next morning, I showed up at 0600 hours for a training flight with Lieutenant Nguyen. She was already in the ready room, reviewing her pre-flight checklist, focused and determined. When she saw me, she straightened. "Ready when you are, ma'am." "Good," I said. "Let's fly." We walked out to the flight line together, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon, and I felt something shift. Not closure, not healing, just forward momentum. One day, one flight, one step at a time. That's all any of us could do. Uncle Ray died in October, 8 months after his heart attack. Mike Harrison called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice steady but heavy with the kind of grief that comes from losing someone you'd tried to save. He went peacefully, in his sleep. The doctors said his heart just gave out. I was in my office, reviewing flight schedules for the following week. I set down my pen and stared at the wall. When's the funeral? Saturday. 1100 hours. Arlington National Cemetery. Full military honors. I'll be there, I said. Mike hesitated. He left something for you. In his will. I have it whenever you're ready. What is it? I'd rather give it to you in person. I met Mike at a coffee shop near base the next morning. He was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived, a manila envelope on the table in front of him. He stood when he saw me, shook my hand, and gestured for me to sit. Thanks for coming. Of course. I looked at the envelope. That's it? Yeah. Mike slid it across the table. He wrote you a letter. And there's something else inside. He asked me to make sure you got both. I picked up the envelope, felt the weight of it. There was something solid inside, wrapped in paper. I opened it carefully, pulled out the letter first. Ray's handwriting, shaky but legible. Evie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I won't waste your time with excuses or apologies you've already heard. I just wanted you to know that the last few months of my life were spent trying to understand what I'd been too stubborn to see before. Mike helped with that. So did some of the other guys at the VA. They told me stories about operators they'd worked with, women who'd done things most men couldn't. And I realized I'd been wrong. Not just about you. About everything. I know I can't make up for the years I spent undermining you. I know saying sorry doesn't change what I did. But I need you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because you're my niece. Because you're a soldier. A real one. The kind I always wanted to be but never had the courage to become. Inside this envelope is something that belonged to me. I want you to have it. Not because I think it'll fix things, but because it's the only way I know to show you that I finally understand. Your Uncle Ray. I set the letter down and reached back into the envelope. My fingers closed around cold metal. I pulled it out and stared. It was Ray's Staff Sergeant rank insignia. The 3 chevrons and 1 rocker he'd worn for the last decade of his career. The rank he'd been so proud of, the one he'd held onto as proof that he'd served, that he'd mattered. And he'd left it to me. I looked up at Mike. Why would he do this? Mike's expression was sad but knowing. Because he wanted you to understand that he finally respected what you'd achieved. That he recognized the cost of what you'd done. He told me the day before he died that giving you those rank insignia was his way of saying you'd surpassed him. Not just in rank. In everything that mattered. I turned the insignia over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the history. I thought about all the times Ray had worn it, all the pride he'd carried in that small piece of metal. And I thought about him giving it up, acknowledging that his legacy wasn't in what he'd held onto, but in what he'd finally been able to let go. Thank you, I said quietly, for helping him see it. I didn't do much, Mike said. He did the work himself. It just took him longer than it should have. The funeral was dignified and solemn. A flag-draped casket, a firing party, taps played on a single bugle. My mother sat beside me, holding my hand, while Mike Harrison stood at attention in the row behind us. When they folded the flag and presented it to my mother, I saw her hands tremble as she accepted it. Afterward, people gathered at the reception hall. Veterans Ray had served with, family members I hadn't seen in years, friends who told stories about his sense of humor and his dedication. I stood at the edge of the room, listening, feeling disconnected from the version of Ray they were describing. He'd been different with them. Lighter. Less burdened by the resentment that had poisoned our relationship. Mike found me near the end of the reception. "You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "It's just strange. Hearing about him like this. Like he was someone I didn't really know." "Maybe he was," Mike said. "People are complicated. They can be generous and bitter at the same time. Strong and insecure. Proud and ashamed. Ray was all of those things. But at the end, I think he was trying to be better." "I hope so," I said. Mike reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "There's one more thing. He asked me to give this to you today. Said it needed to be at the funeral." I opened the box. Inside was a military challenge coin, worn smooth with age. On one side was the insignia of Ray's old unit. On the other, etched in small letters, were the words, "To LT Call Evelyn Cole. You were always the better soldier." I stared at it, feeling something break open inside me. Not grief, exactly. More like release. The acknowledgement I'd been carrying without realizing I still wanted it. The recognition that, despite everything, Ray had seen me. Really seen me. And had been brave enough to say it, even if it came too late. "He had it made a month before he died," Mike said quietly. "Took him 3 tries to get the words right." I closed the box and slipped it into my pocket. "Thank you for being there for him. For helping him find his way." "He was my friend," Mike said. "That's what friends do." I left the reception early, drove home in silence, and sat on my couch with the challenge coin in one hand and Ray's rank insignia in the other. 2 pieces of metal that represented a lifetime of service, of struggle, of pride and regret. I thought about the man who'd taught me to shoot, who'd given me my first salute, who'd spent years resenting me before finally understanding what I'd done and who I'd become. I thought about forgiveness, about whether it mattered if it came posthumously, whether Ray's transformation in his final months counted for anything. And I realized it did. Not because it changed the past, but because it changed how I remembered him. Not as the man who'd mocked me at a barbecue, but as the man who'd found the courage to admit he was wrong. That night, I placed both the rank insignia and the challenge coin on the shelf beside the photo of Unit 47. Different symbols of service, different journeys, but all part of the same story. A story about earning respect, surviving loss, and finding a way to carry both with grace. The next morning, I returned to work. Lieutenant Nguyen was waiting in the ready room, her flight gear already prepped. "Morning, ma'am. Ready for today's exercise?" "Ready," I said. We walked to the flight line together, and as the sun rose over the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, exactly, but something close. A sense that the battles I'd fought, the ones in the air and the ones on the ground, had shaped me into someone who could carry the weight without breaking. Someone who could mentor the next generation without passing on the bitterness. Someone who'd survived and chosen to keep moving forward. 3 years passed. The kind of years that reshape you without you noticing until you look back and realize how far you've traveled. I made full colonel at 38, another below-the-zone promotion that came with command of an entire special operations wing. Lieutenant Nguyen, now a captain, had become one of the squadron's most respected pilots. She'd flown combat missions I couldn't ask about and returned with the same haunted look I recognized in my own mirror. We still met for coffee every few months. She'd started mentoring junior officers herself, passing on the lessons I'd taught her, building a network of women who understood what it meant to prove yourself in spaces designed to doubt you. It was slow work, generational work, but it mattered. Every time one of them succeeded, it pushed the door a little wider for the ones coming after. Mike Harrison and I stayed in touch. Not frequently, but enough. He'd text on holidays, check in when he knew I was deployed, send articles about veterans' issues he thought I'd find interesting. He never asked about the classified parts of my service, never pushed for details I couldn't give. He just maintained a quiet presence, a reminder that someone outside my chain of command understood the weight I carried. On a cold morning in November, I stood in front of a formation of new recruits at the Air Force Academy. Colonel James Rourke, now a brigadier general, had asked me to speak at their commissioning ceremony. "Tell them what service really means," he'd said. Not the recruiting poster version. The real thing. I'd written and rewritten my speech a dozen times, trying to find words that would capture the truth without crushing their optimism. They were so young, these new second lieutenants, their uniforms crisp and their faces bright with anticipation. They didn't know yet what they were walking into. Didn't know about the missions that would haunt them, the friends they'd lose, the sacrifices that would hollow them out and remake them into something harder. But they needed to know that it was worth it anyway. I stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at their faces. When I was commissioned 18 years ago, I thought I understood what service meant. I thought it was about duty, honor, country, all the words we carve into monuments and print on recruiting materials. And those things matter. But they're not the whole story. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Service is what happens when the mission goes wrong. When the plan falls apart and people start dying and you have to make decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life. It's what happens when you bring 4 people home and leave 8 behind and spend the next decade wondering if there was something more you could have done. The formation was silent. Even the wind seemed to still. Service is also what happens when people underestimate you. When they assume you're not capable, not strong enough, not suited for the work. And you do it anyway. Not to prove them wrong, but because the mission matters more than their opinions. I thought about Uncle Ray. About the barbecue where he declared I was the reason women shouldn't be in combat. About the hospital bed where he'd apologized. About the rank insignia and challenge coins sitting on my shelf at home. Some of you will face skepticism from people who should support you. Some of you will carry scars no one else can see. Some of you will do things you can never talk about, earn medals you can never wear, and wonder if any of it mattered. I looked across the formation, meeting eyes, holding gazes. It matters. Not because of the recognition you'll receive, but because of the people depending on you to show up when everything's falling apart. I glanced at my notes, then set them aside. Respect isn't granted by gender, race, background, or family legacy. It's earned in the dark when no one's watching, when the only witness to your courage is yourself. That's the standard. Not perfection. Not fearlessness. Just the willingness to keep going when everything in you wants to quit. The ceremony continued. I pinned wings on a young lieutenant, a woman who reminded me of myself at that age, determined, uncertain, trying to project confidence she didn't quite feel yet. "You've got this," I whispered as I stepped back. She nodded, blinking back tears, and I saw in her face every pilot I'd ever mentored, every operator I'd flown into combat, every person who'd trusted me to bring them home. That evening, Mike Harrison called. Saw the speech online. The Academy posted it. "You did good, Evie. Thanks." Wasn't sure if I went too dark. "You went honest," he said. That's what they needed. We talked for a while about nothing important. His grandkids, my latest assignment, the VA's new programs for combat veterans. Eventually, he said, "I've been thinking about Ray a lot lately. About how hard he tried at the end to make things right." "Yeah," I said. "Me too. You know what I think he'd say if he could see you now? Commanding a wing, mentoring the next generation, being the kind of leader he always wanted to be." "What?" "He'd say he was wrong about everything except one thing, you being exceptional. He just had the reasons backward." I smiled at that. "I appreciate the thought, Mike. But I'm not exceptional. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing," he said, laughing. "Same damn thing." After we hung up, I sat on my back porch and watched the sunset. The sky was brilliant, orange and purple and gold, the kind of sunset that makes you understand why people write poems and paint pictures. I thought about the arc of my career, about the path from second lieutenant to colonel, from idealistic recruit to battle-scarred veteran. I thought about Unit 47, about the 11 people who didn't make it home, about the weight of surviving when others didn't. And I thought about Uncle Ray's challenge coin, the one that said you were always the better soldier. I'd carried it on every deployment since his death, a talisman and a reminder. Not of his approval, of his journey. From resentment to recognition. From bitterness to respect. From seeing me as a threat to seeing me as I was. The next morning, I returned to work. Captain Gwynn was waiting in my office, a folder in her hands. "Ma'am, I wanted to talk to you about something." I've been selected for a special assignment. Classified. They can't tell me what it is until I accept, but they said you'd understand what it means. I looked at her carefully. Are you asking for my advice or my permission? Your advice. I thought about the question behind the question. About the choice she was facing. The work will cost you. More than you think. More than you want to believe. But if you're called to it, if it's the kind of mission where you're the only one who can do it, then you go. You do the work. And you live with what it takes. She nodded slowly. Did you ever regret it? The classified assignments. The things you can't talk about. Every day, I said honestly. And I'd do it again. She stood, saluted, and left my office. I watched her go, knowing she'd accept the assignment, knowing she'd walk the same path I had, knowing she'd carry her own scars and her own survivors. And I hoped that when her time came, when she stood where I was standing now, she'd find the strength to keep moving forward. Because that's what service was. Not the medals or the ceremonies or the recognition. But the willingness to carry the weight, to mentor the next generation, to transform pain into purpose. That night, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a sealed trident, tarnished with age, wrapped in tissue paper. A note was tucked beneath it, written in Mike Harrison's careful handwriting. Ray wanted you to have this when the time was right. It was mine. Carried it through 6 deployments. Figured you've earned the right to carry it too. Not because you're a SEAL, but because you're the kind of warrior every service branch wishes they had more of. Keep fighting the good fight. Mike, I held the trident in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the history. 2 men, one who'd doubted me, one who'd believed in me, both finding ways to say the same thing: you matter. Your service matters. The battles you've fought matter. I placed it on the shelf beside Ray's rank insignia, the challenge coin, and the photo of Unit 47. Different symbols, different stories, all part of the same legacy. A legacy built not on perfection but on perseverance. Not on being fearless, but on showing up afraid and doing the work anyway. The next morning, I pinned on my rank, straightened my uniform, and headed to the flight line. There was work to do. People to lead. A mission to complete. And that was enough. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in March, 10 years after that barbecue where everything changed. It was from the Air Force Special Operations Command, printed on heavy cardstock, formal and impersonal. A ceremony honoring veterans of classified operations, a rare public acknowledgement of missions that officially never happened. My name was listed among the recipients. So were the names of the 11 others from Unit 47, all designated as deceased. I held the invitation for a long time, reading and rereading the words. In recognition of extraordinary service under conditions of extreme adversity. It didn't name the missions. Didn't cite specific actions. Just a vague acknowledgement that we'd done something, somewhere, that mattered. It was more than I'd expected. Less than we'd earned. I called Mike Harrison. He answered on the second ring. Let me guess. You got the invitation. Yeah. Did you know about this? I heard rumors. Some of the SEAL guys got similar ones. Sounds like someone high up decided it was time to honor the people who did the work nobody could talk about. He paused. You going? I don't know. It feels like I struggled for the words. Like opening a door I've spent years keeping closed. Maybe that's the point, Mike said gently. Maybe it's time. The ceremony was held at Joint Base Andrews on a Saturday morning in April. I wore my dress blues, the medals I could display arranged in precise rows across my chest. The classified citation wasn't among them. That one stayed locked in a vault, recognition I'd never wear publicly. But the others told their own story, years of service, deployments to places I couldn't name, commendations for actions that remained sealed. The auditorium was small, intimate, filled with maybe 100 people. Veterans from units I'd heard whispered about but never confirmed. Their families, some who clearly knew what their loved ones had done, others who were only now beginning to understand. And representatives from every branch, senior officers who'd come to bear witness to sacrifices that had been hidden for too long. I found a seat near the middle, beside a retired Army Delta operator who nodded but didn't speak. We didn't need to. There was a recognition in the silence, and understanding that we'd walked similar paths through different darkness. The ceremony began with a color guard, the flags moving in precise formation. Then a 3-star general took the podium, a man whose face I recognized from classified briefings years ago. His voice was measured, deliberate. We gather today to honor those who served in the shadows. Those who accepted missions knowing their success would never be celebrated and their failures would be denied. Those who understood that the highest form of service is the kind that goes unrecognized, unacknowledged, and often unremembered. He spoke about sacrifice and duty, about the cost of classified operations and the burden carried by those who survived them. Then he began reading names. Each one was followed by a brief, carefully sanitized description of their service. When he reached Unit 47, my breath caught. Major Evelyn Cole, now Colonel, United States Air Force. For actions during a classified operation in support of national security objectives, demonstrating extraordinary courage and skill under fire, resulting in the successful extraction of personnel from a hostile environment despite catastrophic equipment failure and overwhelming enemy contact. I stood when my name was called, walked to the stage, accepted the handshake and the commemorative coin. The general's eyes met mine, and I saw in them a flicker of recognition. He'd read the real report, the one with all the details still classified. He knew what had actually happened that night in Kandahar. "Thank you for your service, Colonel," he said quietly, "and for carrying what came after." I returned to my seat, the coin heavy in my hand. Then the general continued, reading the names of the 11 who hadn't made it home. Each name landed like a punch. Torres, Patterson, Williams, Garrett, Chen. All of them memorialized in a ceremony that still couldn't tell the full truth of how they'd died or why. When he finished, a bugler played taps. The notes echoed through the auditorium, mournful and perfect, and I felt tears I'd been holding for a decade finally break free. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet streams down my face that I didn't bother to wipe away. After the ceremony, people mingled in the reception area. I stood by the window, looking out at the flight line, trying to gather myself. A woman approached, older, maybe 60, with gray hair and kind eyes. "Colonel Cole? I'm Patricia Torres." Your son was my co-pilot," I said, recognizing her from the photo Torres had kept in his locker. "He saved my life. Multiple times." Her face crumpled, and she pulled me into a hug. "They never told me what happened. Just that he died in a training accident. But I knew. A mother knows. He was the best pilot I ever flew with," I said, and meant it. "The best person I ever knew. I'm sorry I couldn't bring him home." "You brought yourself home," she said, pulling back to look at me. "And you've honored him by continuing to serve. That's what he would have wanted." We talked for 20 minutes, and I told her everything I could. The sanitized version, the parts that wouldn't violate classification, but enough to give her a picture of who her son had been in those final moments. Brave. Focused. Making jokes even as the aircraft disintegrated around us. She cried and laughed and thanked me, and when she walked away, I felt something shift. Not healing, but a small easing of the weight. Mike Harrison found me before I left. "You did good today. Showing up. Facing it. Didn't feel like I had a choice." "You always have a choice," he said. "That's what makes it meaningful." We walked out to the parking lot together, the spring sun warm on our faces. "You ever wonder," I said, "if any of it made a difference? The missions, the sacrifices, all the things we can't talk about." "Every day," Mike said. "And then I see people like you. People who took the worst moments of their lives and turned them into something that helps others." And I think, yeah, it mattered. I drove home that afternoon with the commemorative coin on the passenger seat, thinking about Patricia Torres and her son's last moments. Thinking about Uncle Ray and the journey he'd taken from resentment to respect. Thinking about all the pilots I'd mentored, all the missions I'd flown, all the ways I'd tried to make the survival mean something. That evening, I sat on my back porch and called Captain Gwynn, who was now a major herself, leading her own flight. "How's the new command?" "Challenging," she said. "But good. I keep remembering the things you taught me. About focusing on the mission instead of the noise. You're going to do great things, Sarah. You already have. I hope so. I want to make it easier for the women coming after me. The way you made it easier for me. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness and thought about legacy. Not the kind that comes from medals or ceremonies or public recognition, but the kind built in quiet conversations, in mentorship sessions, in the decision to keep showing up even when the weight feels unbearable. Uncle Ray's challenge coin was in my pocket, like always. I pulled it out, turned it over in my hands, read the inscription for the 1,000th time. You were always the better soldier. He'd been wrong about that. I wasn't better. I was just luckier. I'd survived when others didn't, and I'd chosen to carry that survival forward instead of letting it destroy me. That was the real lesson. Not that service was glorious or that sacrifice was noble, but that you could walk through the darkness, come out the other side damaged and scarred, and still choose to be someone who made things better for the people following behind you. A week later, I stood in front of another formation of new officers, this time at my own wing. I'd been asked to pin on their new rank insignia, to welcome them officially into the Special Operations community. As I moved down the line, making eye contact with each one, I saw their nervousness, their excitement, their determination to prove themselves worthy. When I reached the last officer, a young woman with the same fierce look I remembered seeing in my own mirror years ago, I pinned on her insignia and said quietly, "You belong here. Don't let anyone tell you different. Not even yourself." She nodded, blinking rapidly. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." "And one more thing," I added. "When it gets hard, and it will, remember that you're not alone. There's a whole line of people who walked this path before you, who faced the same doubts, the same challenges. We're still here. Still fighting. And we've got your back." That night, I updated the photo display on my shelf. The Unit 47 picture was still there, still central. But around it, I'd added others. Photos of the pilots I'd mentored, of ceremonies I'd attended, of missions I could acknowledge. A visual reminder that the story didn't end in Kandahar. It continued through every person I'd trained, every officer I'd inspired, every barrier I'd helped break down. I picked up Mike Harrison's sealed trident, held it up to the light. It was tarnished and worn, marked by years of service and sacrifice. Like me. Like everyone who'd chosen this path and lived long enough to see what it cost. But unlike the pain, unlike the loss, the trident remained solid. Tangible. A reminder that some things endured beyond the individual. Legacy wasn't about living forever. It was about building something that outlasted you. About making the path a little clearer for those who came after. I placed the trident back on the shelf, between Uncle Ray's rank insignia and the commemorative coin from the ceremony. 3 pieces of metal, 3 different journeys, all pointing toward the same truth. Respect was earned through action, legacy was built through service, and healing came not from forgetting, but from transforming pain into purpose. The voiceover of my life, if it could be heard, wouldn't be dramatic or poetic. It would be steady, measured, honest. The voice of a woman who'd survived when she shouldn't have, who'd been doubted when she deserved respect, who'd carried impossible weight and somehow found the strength to keep walking forward. It would say, "I served. I survived. I tried to make it mean something." And in the quiet moments, in the spaces between missions and ceremonies and memories, I believed it did. The next morning, I woke at 0500 hours, pulled on my flight suit, and headed to the flight line. There was a training exercise scheduled, a complex scenario designed to push the new pilots to their limits. I'd be in the observation tower, watching, evaluating, ready to step in if needed. As I drove through the base in the pre-dawn darkness, I passed the memorial wall where names of the fallen were etched in granite. I slowed, like I always did, and said a quiet prayer for the 11 faces that still haunted my dreams. Then I continued forward, because that's what survivors did. We carried the dead with us, honored their memory, and kept moving toward whatever came next. The sun was just beginning to rise when I reached the tower, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. I thought about all the sunrises I'd seen from cockpits, from forward operating bases, from hospital rooms and ceremony grounds. Each one a reminder that another day was beginning, Another chance to serve, another opportunity to make the sacrifice mean something. I climbed the stairs to the observation deck, checked in with the controllers, and prepared for the exercise. Below me, young pilots were running through their pre-flight checks, their voices crackling over the radio, their movements precise and determined. They were the future. The next generation of warriors who'd face challenges I couldn't imagine and carry burdens I'd never know. And somewhere among them was the woman I'd spoken to at the ceremony, the one who'd looked at me with such fierce determination. She'd faced doubts and obstacles. She'd be underestimated and questioned. But she'd also have something I hadn't had, a path cleared by those who came before, a network of support, a legacy of women who'd proven it could be done. That was enough. That was everything. The radio crackled. Tower, Viper flight is ready for departure. I keyed the mic. Viper flight, you are cleared for takeoff. Fly safe out there. Copy that, Tower. Viper flight rolling. I watched them taxi to the runway, watched them accelerate and lift into the morning sky, their aircraft gleaming in the early light. And I thought about Unit 47, about Uncle Ray, about every person who'd shaped my journey from idealistic lieutenant to seasoned colonel. The story wasn't finished. It never would be. But it was enough to know that I'd played my part, honored the fallen, and cleared a path for those still climbing. Respect wasn't granted by blood or gender. It was earned in the dark when no one was watching, when the only witness to your courage was yourself and the people depending on you to bring them home. I'd done that. I'd brought them home. And I'd keep doing it, one flight at a time, one mentorship at a time, one day at a time, until the mission was complete. That's my story, not about revenge, but about boundaries and respect. If it resonated, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. Drop your take below. I read every comment. Questions for you. Have you ever been dismissed by family and had to draw a hard line? Did an apology change anything, or just clarify who they were? What does earned respect look like in your world? If you've served, how did you handle people minimizing your role? Who are you mentoring now so they don't fight the same battles alone?